The slap came faster than I could breathe. 1 second, I was standing near the desert table, smiling at the guests, proud to see my son Ethan finally married. The next, a sharp sting exploded across my cheek. My glasses flew off, spinning in the air before shattering on the ballroom floor. For a few seconds, the world went completely silent. The music stopped, the chatter froze, and 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us. I heard the faint echo of someone gasping. Then Juliet's voice cut through the air like broken glass. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she screamed, her white wedding dress glowing under the chandeliers. "A woman your age doesn't need that much space. You should be ashamed of yourself." I stood there, frozen. My cheek burned, my vision blurred, without my glasses. But the pain wasn't in my face, it was in my chest. The humiliation felt like a knife twisting slowly, not because she had slapped me, but because no one, not a single soul, moved to defend me. Guests whispered behind their champagne glasses. Some looked away, some even chuckled nervously, unsure how to react. But the worst of them all was my son, my only son, standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't say a word. "Ethan and I need our privacy," Juliet continued, her voice trembling with the high of her own power. "Your apartment is too big for an old woman like you. We'll move in there, while we look for something better." Her words echoed through the ballroom like a cruel joke. I could see people exchanging glances, some pitying, others amused. My knees felt weak, but I refused to fall. For years, I had let them talk down to me about my old clothes, my little car, my simple life. I had smiled through it all. But that night, as I crouched to pick up the broken pieces of my glasses, I knew something inside me had changed forever. The glass fragments sparkled under the golden light, tiny mirrors reflecting a truth I had ignored for too long. I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. I had simply chosen silence. And now that silence was over, when I finally stood up, the room was still watching. My cheek was red, my hands shaking slightly, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "Congratulations," I said softly. "I hope you enjoy the home you think you're taking from me." I turned and began walking toward the exit. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step louder than the last, echoing in the dead silence of the ballroom. I could feel Juliet's smug smile burning into my back. But I didn't look back. Outside, the night air was cool and calm, a cruel contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. I walked slowly to my car, my mind replaying every cruel word, every fake smile, every time Juliet had treated me like a burden instead of family. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The slap had left a faint red mark, but it would fade. What wouldn't fade was the decision I made at that exact moment. It was time for them to learn who I really was. I reached into my purse and pulled out my old phone. My fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from rage that had finally turned to resolve. I dialed a number I hadn't used in a year. "Carlos." He picked up on the second ring. "Mrs. Hughes." "Yes, Carlos," I said, my voice calm, almost cold. "I need you to come to the Royal Oaks ballroom. Bring the documents." There was a pause. "The ones you told me to keep in case of emergencies." "Exactly those," I said. "It's time." "Are you sure, Mrs. Hughes?" he asked carefully. "Once we do this, there's no going back." I looked at the ballroom's glowing windows, where laughter and music had started again, as if nothing had happened. Somewhere in there, my son was pretending not to see the truth, and his new wife was celebrating her small, cruel victory. "I'm sure," I said quietly. "They've made their choice. Now they'll see mine." When I hung up, I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. The cool night breeze slipped through the half-open window, carrying the faint sound of music and laughter, sounds that once brought me joy but now felt hollow. They had no idea who they had just humiliated. They thought I was just an old widow with a small pension, clinging to a too-big apartment and an outdated life. They thought they could bully me, manipulate me, steal from me, and I would quietly fade away. But they were wrong. I had built that life from the ground up with my late husband, Robert. I had sacrificed everything to keep our family safe, even my pride. And if there was one thing Robert had taught me, it was that you never show your true strength until it's absolutely necessary. And tonight, it had become absolutely necessary. I started the car engine and glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 30 minutes. That's how long it would take Carlos to get here. 30 minutes until my son and his new wife learned that the quiet old woman they had just slapped in front of 130 guests was far more powerful than they ever imagined. Smiled faintly to myself, a small, cold smile that even surprised me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. For the first time, I felt alive. 2.5 years earlier, the world had seemed gentler. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sunlight felt like honey, slow and golden. I had just finished watering the plants on my balcony when I heard Ethan's voice from the hallway. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special." I wiped my hands on my apron and smiled. My son sounded nervous, the same nervousness he used to have before bringing home a school report card. And there she was. Juliet. She was stunning. That much I'll admit. A woman with the kind of beauty that demands a room's attention. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes looked expensive, and her perfume filled the small apartment like an uninvited guest. But what struck me most wasn't her beauty. It was her eyes. They were scanning my living room, not with curiosity, but with calculation. "How cozy," she said finally, her voice dripping with polite disdain as she looked around at my second-hand furniture and old lace curtains. Ethan laughed, missing the tone completely. "Yeah, Mom loves her old-fashioned stuff." I smiled, because that's what mothers do. We smile even when we feel the first sting of something we can't yet name. That day, we had dinner together, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and my homemade pie. Juliet barely touched her food. She picked at the crust and complimented me with a tight smile. "You're quite the homemaker," she said. "But don't you get tired of cooking for just yourself?" The question was innocent enough, but her tone wasn't. I caught the faintest glimmer of superiority behind her polite expression. After dinner, Ethan walked her out to her car. I stood by the window and watched them, the way she leaned into him, whispering something that made him blush. I saw it all, and in that moment, I felt it, the smallest flicker of unease. Over the next few months, they visited more often. Each time Juliet came over, she'd make little comments that sounded sweet but cut deep. "Aurora, this place must be hard to maintain at your age. Have you ever thought about moving to one of those lovely senior apartments? Less work, more comfort." Or, my favorite, "Ethan and I were just talking about how lonely it must get here sometimes." Always with a smile, always pretending to care. At first I brushed it off. I told myself she was young and didn't mean any harm. But then I began to notice a pattern. Her eyes always lingered on the same things: the view from my balcony, the spacious living room, the framed photos of my husband and me on our wedding day. Once, I caught her standing in front of the window, her reflection in the glass, whispering softly into her phone. Double quotes, "Yes, Mom," she said, "it's in a really expensive neighborhood. If I play my cards right, we could move here before Christmas." My heart dropped into my stomach. I should have confronted her right then, but I didn't. I played dumb. I offered her tea when she came back from her phone call. I smiled as if I hadn't heard a thing, because sometimes silence is more powerful than words. From then on, every encounter with Juliet became a performance. She played the perfect daughter-in-law, all fake concern and sugary politeness, while I played the fragile old lady she thought I was. I let her believe she was winning. Ethan, poor Ethan, didn't stand a chance. He had always been gentle, easily swayed by emotion. Juliet knew exactly which strings to pull. She would hold his hand and say things like, "Your mom deserves better. Ethan, we should help her downsize so she can live comfortably." And he would nod, looking at me with that same pity I had seen in other people's eyes, the kind of pity that feels like poison. I remember one dinner at their apartment. Juliet had decorated the place like a magazine spread, cold and perfect. She poured me wine and smiled sweetly. "You know, Aurora, you could sell your apartment and still have money left to travel, relax, maybe even move closer to us." I looked her in the eye and said, "I'm not planning to move anytime soon." She laughed softly. "Oh, come on, don't be stubborn. You can't live alone forever." Her mother, who was visiting that night, joined in with her syrupy voice. "You must think of the young ones too. They're just starting their life." Their words blurred into noise. I sipped my wine, feeling the burn of humiliation rise up my throat. That night, when I got home, I sat in the dark for a long time. The city lights flickered through my window, and I thought of my late husband, Robert. He used to tell me, "People will always show you who they are, Aurora. You just have to be patient enough to see it." Juliet was showing me, and I was watching. The next few months brought more of the same. Little jabs disguised as concern, subtle Then came the day Ethan told me they were getting married. "Mom," he said, holding Juliet's hand, "we want to have the ceremony at the Royal Oaks Ballroom. It's kind of expensive, but it'll be worth it." I smiled and congratulated them. But inside, something felt wrong. And when Juliet leaned in to kiss my cheek, I could smell her perfume, sweet, expensive, suffocating, and I knew. She wasn't just marrying my son, she was marrying my life, my home, my everything. The night after they announced their engagement, I sat on my balcony, staring at the lights of the city. My heart was heavy, but my mind was sharp. I started keeping notes, small details, dates, conversations, because someday, I knew I'd need them. This was how it began, the slow poisoning of peace, drop by drop, word by word. Juliet thought she was clever, but she was playing chess with a woman who had been quiet for far too long. And soon, I would show her how the game really ends. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. The city outside my window was quiet, wrapped in that strange stillness that only comes before a storm. I sat in my armchair, wrapped in my old blanket, staring at the photo of my late husband, Robert. He had been gone for 12 years, but I could still hear his voice, sometimes calm, strong, certain. "Aurora," he'd once said, "if the world ever turns against you, remember what we built. Remember who you are." For years, I hadn't needed to remember. Life had been simple. Work at the flower shop 3 days a week, dinner alone, phone calls from Ethan once in a while. Quiet, predictable, safe. But that peace had been a disguise. My disguise, because Robert and I hadn't always been ordinary when we were young. Robert had been a financial analyst, brilliant, ambitious, the kind of man who could turn numbers into gold. Together, we'd started a small investment company that quietly grew over the years. We made smart decisions, avoided greed, and built something real. By the time Robert fell ill, we were wealthy. Quietly, invisibly wealthy. But we made a choice. To live simply, humbly. We'd seen too many families torn apart by money. "Let them think we're average," Robert used to say. "It's the best protection." So after he died, I sold the company's name, moved into a modest apartment, and kept only a few trusted people who knew the truth. Carlos was one of them, my financial advisor, my secret guardian. He managed the funds, quietly investments spread across properties, stocks, and accounts under trust names. My name never appeared anywhere. The world saw me as a widow living on a small pension. That illusion had kept me safe for years, until Juliet came along. When she first started visiting, I noticed how her eyes lingered on the small things, my antique vase, the art on my walls. She had no idea that those old decorations were originals worth thousands. She thought she was looking at a simple woman's home, but she was standing inside a fortress, built on discretion and discipline. And the more she pushed me to move somewhere smaller, the clearer her intentions became. It wasn't love driving her, it was desperation. I decided to find out exactly what kind of desperation. One evening, after she and Ethan had left, I picked up my phone and called Carlos. "Carlos," I said, "I need you to look into something." His tone immediately turned serious. "What is it, Mrs. Hughes?" "My son and his fiancée," I said softly. "I want to know everything. Their finances, their debts, their loans, everything." There was a pause. "That might take a few weeks." "Take your time," I told him, "but be thorough." 3 weeks later, he came to my apartment. I still remember the look on his face, that uncomfortable mix of pity and respect. He placed a thick folder on my coffee table. "You should sit down before you read this." Inside were documents, printouts, reports, all confirming what I already feared. Ethan was drowning in debt, over $80,000 in credit card balances, loans for a car he couldn't afford, and Juliet. She was even worse. Personal loans, maxed out cards, unpaid bills. Their wedding, the one she bragged would be the event of the season, was being financed entirely on borrowed money. I turned the page and saw something that made my hands go cold. The past 6 months, Ethan had been calling banks and legal firms, asking about power of attorney forms for elderly relatives. He'd even inquired about transferring property titles in case of medical decline. My own son had been preparing to take everything I owned, legally. Carlos spoke gently. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hughes. They're in deep trouble. And your apartment," he hesitated. "It's the only thing keeping them from collapsing." I closed the folder slowly. my fingers trembling. Thank you, Carlos. He leaned forward, concern in his eyes. What will you do? I looked out the window, the city lights flickering like stars. Nothing, not yet, because anger without strategy is just noise, and I was done being quiet. But I wasn't ready to be loud, not until I could make the noise count. That night, I opened a small metal box hidden under my bed. Inside were old documents, trust deeds, bank statements, a will I had updated 5 years earlier. At the bottom was a sealed envelope labeled emergency plan, Robert's handwriting. I opened it for the first time since his death. Inside was a short note. If anyone ever tries to take what's ours, show them the truth, but only when you're ready. I smiled through my tears. I could almost hear his voice, steady and reassuring. I was ready. The next few days, I watched Ethan and Juliet prepare for their wedding, pretending everything was normal. I attended fittings, smiled in photos, endured her endless comments about fresh starts. But every time she looked at me with that smug little smirk, I felt my resolve harden. Let her think she was winning. Let her think I was powerless. Because when the truth came out, it wouldn't just ruin her wedding day, it would shatter the perfect image she'd built for herself. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to teach her, and my son, what it means to underestimate a woman who's been silent for too long. By the time the wedding day arrived, everything was in place. Carlos had the documents ready, the legal titles, the trust deeds, the proof of ownership that would turn every smug word they'd spoken into ash. And when Juliet raised her hand and slapped me across the face in front of 130 guests, she had no idea. She had just written the ending to her own story, because that was the moment the mask fell for both of us that night. As I sat in my car waiting for Carlos to arrive, I wasn't the old woman everyone saw. I was Aurora Hughes' widow, mother, businesswoman, survivor. And tomorrow, everyone would finally remember my name. The ballroom still buzzed with soft laughter and clinking glasses. Juliet glowed under the chandeliers, flawless, confident, surrounded by friends who whispered compliments about her gown. Ethan stood beside her, smiling faintly, his eyes occasionally darting toward the door. He didn't know that every second ticking by was bringing him closer to the moment that would break his illusion forever. Outside, I sat in my old sedan, the engine off, my hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. The slap still stung on my cheek, but the pain had turned to something sharper, focused. 20 minutes after my call, a black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot. Carlos stepped out, his expression unreadable. He carried a leather briefcase, the kind that only opened when the truth demanded it. He walked toward me briskly. Mrs. Hughes, he greeted, his tone formal but warm. Carlos, I said quietly, you have the papers. He nodded. Everything, bank statements, property deeds, trust ownership, the full asset report. I also brought the legal declaration you asked for. Perfect. I took a deep breath. Let's go show them who they just humiliated. As we walked back to the ballroom, the noise of the celebration grew louder. Music, laughter, all soon to be silenced. I straightened my posture, wiped away the trace of tears from my eyes, and pushed open the heavy glass doors. The sound of the doors echoed through the hall, and every head turned. Conversations froze. The band stopped mid-note. There I was, the woman everyone had whispered about, the one who'd been slapped, pitied, dismissed. And now, I was standing tall, with Carlos by my side, carrying a briefcase that could destroy illusions and rewrite every assumption in that room. Juliet's smile faltered. Ethan's face drained of color. Aurora, Juliet sneered. I thought we made it clear, you weren't welcome here. Indeed, I said calmly, but it seems I forgot to give my wedding gift. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the guests. Carlos set the briefcase on a nearby table and opened it with a sharp click. He pulled out several neatly arranged folders. I'd like everyone to know, I continued, that this apartment everyone seems so eager to discuss, and much more, will no longer be a topic of family debate. Juliet frowned. What are you talking about? Carlos stepped forward. Allow me to explain, he said in his steady, professional tone. Mrs. Aurora Hughes is the primary trustee of the Hughes Family Holdings, an investment group currently valued at over $14.8 million, with assets spread across properties, international stocks, and private accounts. A collective gasp filled the ballroom. Glasses clinked as someone dropped one. Juliet blinked. That's impossible. She's a florist. I smiled faintly. A florist, yes, by choice. But before that, my late husband and I built something lasting, something we chose to protect from greed, from people who value money more than love. I could see the dawning horror in Juliet's eyes. Ethan's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Carlos continued, "For years, Mrs. Hughes has maintained a low profile for security reasons. Her apartment, which Mrs. Juliet and Mr. Ethan recently attempted to claim, is only one of 5 properties under her name." I turned to Juliet, who now stood frozen, the color draining from her perfect face. "You said a woman my age doesn't need so much space," I said quietly. "You're right. I've decided to donate that apartment, but not to you." Murmurs filled the air again. Juliet stammered, "Donate? To who?" "To a women's shelter downtown," I replied. "They'll use it to house women starting over after abuse and humiliation. I think they'll make better use of it than someone who slaps her own family." A low, collective "oh" rippled through the room. Someone clapped softly before realizing how serious the moment was. Juliet's mask cracked. You can't, just can't I interrupted. "The papers are already signed." Carlos held up the notarized documents. "It's all legally binding." Juliet's hands trembled. "Ethan, say something," she hissed. But Ethan was pale, staring at the papers, at me, at the wreckage of his choices. "Mom," he whispered, "why didn't you tell me?" "Because," I said softly, "you stopped listening long before there was anything left to tell." Juliet suddenly laughed, a high, brittle sound that cracked in the air. "You think this makes you the hero? You think anyone here will pity you now? You just embarrassed yourself in front of everyone." I took a step forward. My voice didn't rise, but the words hit harder than any slap ever could. "No, Juliet, I just reminded everyone that respect is worth more than money, and that arrogance always has a price." The room fell silent again. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Juliet's parents tried to slip away quietly, their heads down. Guests murmured excuses and made for the exits. The perfect wedding was collapsing, piece by piece, like a house of cards in a storm. Ethan looked at me, eyes glassy with regret. "Mom, I'm sorry." I studied his face, the face of the boy I had once rocked to sleep, now a man who had let greed guide his heart. "I hope you mean that," I said softly. "Because sorry doesn't fix betrayal, Ethan, but it's a start." Juliet turned to him, desperate. "Ethan, are you just going to stand there? Say something." He took a step back, his voice hollow. "You hit my mother, Juliet." That was the end. Juliet's mouth opened, but no words came. She looked around the room, at the guests who now avoided her eyes, at the shattered fantasy she'd built, and realized she had lost everything. I turned toward the exit, Carlos beside me. My heart was heavy, but free. As I reached the door, I stopped and looked back one last time. "For years," I said softly, "I lived quietly because I believed silence was peace, but sometimes silence only feeds cruelty. Tonight, I chose truth instead." And with that, I walked out, leaving behind not just humiliation, but the version of myself that tolerated it. The night air outside the ballroom felt different, now cooler, lighter, almost alive. As I stepped out, I could still hear faint murmurs from inside, the echoes of shock and disbelief. That sound, the collapse of lies, was the most peaceful melody I'd ever heard. Carlos walked beside me in silence. He didn't have to say anything. We both knew what had just happened could never be undone. It shouldn't be. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't hiding behind my quiet life, or my modest clothes, or my second-hand car. I was Aurora Hughes' wife, mother, survivor, and now, a woman who had taken back her dignity. We reached my car. I leaned against the door, breathing deeply, trying to steady the storm of emotions inside me. Relief, sadness, grief, power, they all mixed together in a strange, fragile harmony. Carlos looked at me. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "I didn't do it to be right," I replied. "I did it to finally be free." He nodded. "They'll never forget tonight." "I don't want them to," I said, my voice calm. "Sometimes people only learn when life humbles them publicly." He smiled faintly, then hesitated. "Do you want me to stay with you tonight?" "No," I shook my head. "You've done enough. Go home, Carlos. Rest. I'll be fine." After he left, I sat in my car for a long time. The empty parking lot was almost poetic, just me, the faint glow of streetlights, and the quiet hum of my thoughts. Inside the ballroom, the wedding was over. The perfect evening Juliet had dreamed of had turned into the night she would remember with shame for the rest of her life. But for me, it was the night I finally remembered who I truly was. When I reached home, I stood in the middle of my apartment for a long time. The same walls that had once felt heavy with silence now felt warm again, alive with memory. Robert's picture smiled down at me from the shelf, my late husband, my partner in everything. I did it, Robert, I whispered. I finally kept our promise to protect what we built, even from our own. It was strange how much power truth could hold, and how heavy it could feel in your heart after carrying it alone for so long. I looked around the apartment, at the furniture that had seen decades of laughter and pain. Tomorrow, this place would belong to someone else. Women who had lost their homes, their families, their confidence would live here. That thought made me smile. The pain that had started here would now give shelter to others. I walked into my small kitchen and brewed a cup of tea. The steam rose slowly, curling like ghosts of old memories. I thought of Ethan, my son, standing silent while his wife humiliated me. Would he come to see me now? Would guilt bring him back? Or pride keep him away? I didn't know, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to, because the woman who once waited for others' apologies no longer existed. The next morning, I woke up early. The sky outside was painted in soft gold. There was a peace in my chest that felt foreign, like something I hadn't felt since Robert's passing. My phone buzzed on the table, a message from Ethan. Mom, please, can we talk? I stared at the words for a long time. Then I typed back, yes, Ethan, but not today. You need time to think. So do I, and I put the phone away. Over the next few days, the story spread like wildfire. The guests couldn't stop talking about the slap that backfired. Every person who had turned away from me that night now whispered apologies behind closed doors. But I didn't care about their opinions anymore. People are quick to judge and even quicker to change sides when power shifts. The only opinion that mattered to me was my own. One afternoon, while walking through the flower shop where I still worked part-time, my coworker asked softly, Aurora, is it true about the wedding? I smiled. Yes, it's true. And you really donated your apartment? Yes, I said. Some gifts aren't meant for family. They're meant for those who deserve them. She looked at me, awe in her eyes. You're incredible. No, I replied, just tired of pretending to be small. A week later, Ethan showed up at my door. He looked thinner, older, broken in ways I'd never seen before. Mom, he said quietly, can I come in? I hesitated, then opened the door. Of course, he stepped inside and looked around the same home where he'd grown up, where laughter once filled the air. He sat down, unable to meet my eyes. Juliet left, he said finally. Her parents cut her off. She says I ruined her life. And what do you think? I asked. He swallowed hard. I think she ruined mine, but I let her. There, it was the truth. Not excuses, not self-defense, just honesty. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. I can't believe I stood there and didn't protect you. I touched his hand gently. Ethan, the hardest lessons are the ones that cost us the most. You paid with your peace. I paid with my silence. We're both done paying. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. Can I ever make it up to you? I smiled sadly. You already started by coming here. That evening, after he left, I sat by the window and watched the sunset. The city glowed below, alive and vast. Somewhere out there, Juliet was learning what it meant to live without power, without lies. And maybe, just maybe, she'd one day understand what she had destroyed. But that wasn't my concern anymore. My life, once built around others' needs, was finally mine again. The following days drifted by like quiet waves, gentle, steady, healing. For the first time in years, my mornings were filled not with anxiety, but with clarity. I watered the plants on my balcony, watched the sunrise spill across the skyline, and breathed without the weight of anyone's expectations. But peace is never perfect. It's fragile, is easily touched by the ghosts of what we love. One morning, as I arranged roses at the flower shop, I heard the faint chime of the bell above the door. When I looked up, Ethan stood there nervous, holding a small bouquet of lilies. Hi, Mom, he said softly. Ethan, I replied, surprised but calm. You didn't have to bring flowers. He smiled weakly. Old habits. I wanted to do something right for once. I gestured for him to sit. The shop was quiet, sunlight spilling through the glass, making dust sparkle in the air. He sat down, his hands shaking slightly. I've been thinking a lot since that night, he said. About you, about Juliet, about who I've become. I listened silently, my fingers gently tracing the edge of a rose petal. He took a deep breath. You know, when I was a kid, I used to think you were the strongest person in the world. You worked 2 jobs, never complained, never asked for help. But somewhere along the way, I started listening to people who said that strength was weakness, that if someone doesn't live like everyone else, they're failing. He looked up, his eyes red. Juliet made me feel small when I was with her. She had this way of turning my insecurities into proof that I needed her. I guess I believed her because it was easier than facing my own failures. I didn't interrupt. Sometimes, silence gives space for truth to bloom. He continued. The night of the wedding, when she hit you, I froze. Not because I agreed with her, but because I realized in that moment how far I had fallen. I wasn't your son anymore, I was her echo. His voice cracked. You didn't deserve that. None of it. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I held them back. I wanted him to finish. He exhaled shakily. After she left, I started cleaning out the apartment. I found the letters Dad wrote you. I read how you two built everything, how you chose to live simply so I could grow up humble, so no one would ever use us for money. You and Dad built an empire, and I turned it into ashes because I forgot what values are worth. The pain in his voice cut deep, but beneath it, I heard something puremos. Ethan, I said quietly, you were blinded, yes, but blindness can heal if you stop pretending you can see. He nodded slowly. I want to make it right. Not for money, not for forgiveness. I just want to be the kind of man Dad would have been proud of and the kind of son you deserve. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock and the hum of the shop's cooler. Then, I smiled faintly. Then start small, Ethan. Help others. Work hard. Learn to listen before you speak. You don't have to fix the past, you just have to stop repeating it. He gave a small, broken laugh. You always make it sound so simple. It's not simple, I said, but it's possible. A few weeks passed. Ethan began visiting more often. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he just sat quietly while I worked with flowers. He started volunteering at a community kitchen nearby, and once I even saw him helping a homeless man fix his jacket in the cold. He was changing, not overnight, not perfectly, but truly. One day, while we were having lunch, he looked up and asked, Mom, do you ever regret keeping your wealth a secret? I smiled. Not for a second. Pretending to be ordinary protected me from the wrong people and revealed the right ones. He nodded. I get it now. Juliet only loved the idea of what you had, not who you were. That's the problem with people who love for gain, I said. They mistake opportunity for affection, and when they lose access, their love disappears too. Ethan's eyes lowered. She tried calling me last week. I arched a brow. And she wanted money, he said bitterly, said she was starting over and needed help. I tilted my head slightly. And what did you say? He met my gaze. I said the same thing you told me once. You can't buy peace with stolen dreams. A proud smile spread across my face. Then maybe you've finally learned what money can't teach. Months later, spring arrived, and the city began to bloom again. My apartment had already been handed over to the shelter, and every time I passed by it, I saw women sitting on the balcony, laughing, rebuilding their lives. It filled me with quiet joy. One morning, the shelter director called. Aurora, we just wanted to say thank you. Because of your donation, 3 families have a home now. My throat tightened. I didn't do it for thanks, I said softly, but I'm glad they found peace where I once found pain. That evening, Ethan visited again. He looked happier, more grounded. He brought takeout from my favorite restaurant and 2 cups of coffee. Mahmoud, he said, setting the food down. I've been saving up. I want to start something new, a small business. Nothing fancy. A landscaping company. I raised an eyebrow. Landscaping. He chuckled. Yeah. After helping at the shelter, I realized I like working with my hands, fixing things, making something beautiful again. I smiled. Your father would have liked that. He looked down, his voice soft. I hope so. Later that night, after he left, I sat by the window again, watching the lights flicker across the city. The world outside hadn't changed much, but mine had. Juliet's greed had burned everything fake to the ground, but from those ashes, truth had grown. And sometimes, that's what life does, it breaks us, just to rebuild us better. The years of silence and humiliation were finally behind me. What remained was freedom, quiet, steady, and pure. I no longer lived for anyone's approval. I woke up each morning with a sense of calm purpose that I hadn't felt since Robert was alive. Every day, I walked through the city, breathing in the scent of blooming magnolias, watching children play in the park, couples laughing, old men reading newspapers on benches. Life went on, and for the first time, I wasn't watching it from behind glass. I was part of it again. The shelter I'd donated my apartment to had become my second home. The women there, young mothers, widows, survivors of loss, had stories that mirrored my own pain. But instead of pity, I felt solidarity. We had all been broken in different ways, and yet here we were, standing. One of them, Clara, a 32-year-old mother of two, reminded me so much of my younger self. She had come in one night, bruised and trembling, carrying her children in her arms. Her husband had abandoned her after years of emotional abuse. I had brought her tea, wrapped her in a blanket, and said softly, "You're safe now." Weeks later, she told me, "Miss Aurora, that night when you said those words, I believed you. For the first time in years, I believed someone. That moment taught me something profound. Sometimes, survival isn't about strength, it's about kindness. The smallest act of compassion can become the foundation of someone else's hope." In the months that followed, I began volunteering full-time at the shelter. I helped organize flower arranging workshops, budgeting classes, and resume writing sessions. My old skills, the patience of a florist, the discipline of a businesswoman, were suddenly more valuable than ever. Word spread quickly about Mrs. Hughes, the quiet woman who helped rebuild lives. People started visiting from nearby towns, looking for guidance, comfort, or simply someone to listen. I didn't just see women. I saw mothers, daughters, survivors, all trying to stitch their dignity back together, one thread at a time. One evening, the shelter director approached me with a smile. "Aurora, we've decided to rename the shelter," she said. "It'll now be called the Hughes Home. Because you gave us more than money, you gave us belief." My breath caught. "You don't have to do that," I protested softly. "We want to," she replied. "You changed everything for us." I didn't know what to say. My eyes filled with tears. Robert would have been proud, I thought. He always told me that wealth was never about numbers. It was about impact. Around that same time, Ethan's landscaping business began to grow. He would come by the shelter on weekends, bringing flowers and planting new trees around the courtyard. I watched him laugh with the women's children, his face brighter than I'd seen in years. One afternoon, he looked up at me from the garden and said, "You know, Mom, I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all along." I smiled knowingly. "And what's that?" "That happiness isn't built on what we have. It's built on who we become." Tears pricked my eyes again, but this time they were tears of pride. My son, the boy who had lost himself in greed and guilt, was slowly becoming the man his father had hoped he'd be. Months turned into a year. The Hughes home was thriving, full of laughter, hope, and life. The flower shop became part of the shelter's therapy program. I taught the women how to create arrangements, how to turn broken stems into beauty again. One afternoon, while preparing a bouquet for a local charity gala, I caught my reflection in the glass window. The woman looking back at me wasn't frail or defeated anymore. Her hair was silver, her hands wrinkled, but her eyes, they glowed with purpose. I whispered softly to myself, "You made it, Aurora." That night, I sat on the balcony of the shelter, watching the stars rise. A gentle wind brushed against my face. For a fleeting moment, I could almost feel Robert beside me, his familiar voice whispering, "You did well, my love." I closed my eyes, letting the memory of him settle like a warm blanket over my heart. A week later, a letter arrived, a formal one, on elegant paper. It was from the city council. They wanted to recognize my contributions to the community at their annual ceremony. I laughed softly when I read it. Recognition was never my goal, but maybe, just maybe, this was the universe's way of saying thank you. The night of the ceremony, I stood on the stage, facing a crowd that clapped and smiled, but all I could think of was the woman I used to be, humiliated at a wedding, slapped in front of strangers, broken and alone. Now, here I was, stronger, freer, surrounded by the light of those who truly saw me. When I accepted the award, I said simply, "Sometimes, life takes everything from you so it can give you yourself back. Don't let humiliation define you. Let it refine you." The room erupted in applause. That night, I returned home to the shelter, set the award on a small shelf, and smiled, because in truth, the real reward was knowing that even after everything, betrayal, loss, and pain. I had not only survived, I had rebuilt that, and this time, I had built something that could never be taken away. The air outside the Hughes home was still that morning, crisp and quiet, touched by the faint scent of gardenia from the flower beds I had planted last spring. I stood by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise streak the sky with gold. Peace had become my daily companion now. For months, nothing had disturbed it, until that morning, the front gate bell rang. Sharp, hesitant, uncertain, I turned, startled, and one of the volunteers, Clara, appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Hughes," she said softly, "there's someone here to see you." Her tone told me everything before I even asked. I nodded slowly. "Send her in." Juliet stepped through the door. She looked nothing like the flawless bride who had once slapped me under the bright lights of her wedding. Her hair was dull, her eyes hollow, her elegant clothes replaced by something faded and cheap. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse to her chest, as if afraid the air itself might take it from her. "Aurora," she whispered, her voice cracked on my name. For a brief second, I almost didn't recognize her. Time, guilt, and hardship had reshaped her completely. I didn't speak. I just gestured toward the wooden chair near the table. She sat down carefully, her shoulders slumped, her gaze fixed on the floor. For a long moment, silence filled the room, the kind of silence that holds the weight of years. Finally, she said, I lost everything." I didn't respond. She continued, words tumbling out like pieces of glass. "After the wedding, after you revealed everything, people stopped trusting us. Ethan left me. He couldn't forgive me, and honestly, I couldn't forgive myself. I tried to start over, but the debt, the shame, it all followed me. My parents won't even talk to me anymore. I live in a tiny room above a laundromat now. I don't know what to do." Her voice broke, and she began to cry softly, not the theatrical sobs of self-pity, but the quiet tears of someone who has truly seen the ruin of her choices. For a long time, I said nothing. I just watched her. Once upon a time, this woman had humiliated me in front of 130 people. She had stripped me of dignity in public, mocked my age, my simplicity, my life. But sitting before me now wasn't a villain. It was a woman who had finally been introduced to consequence. When she looked up again, her eyes were red. "I came here because I heard what you've done," she said. "The shelter, the women, everything. I wanted to say I'm sorry, truly sorry, for all of it." I placed my coffee cup gently on the table. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. "Juliet," I said softly, "forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It only stops it from poisoning the future." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. You were never weak. You were never poor. You were wise, and I was blind." Her words lingered in the air. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf, where a vase of fresh flowers stood, lilies and white roses. I picked one rose and handed it to her. "Take this," I said. "It's not much, but it's a start. Beauty can still grow from broken things." She looked at the flower in disbelief, then clutched it close to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered as she stood to leave. She paused by the doorway. "Ethan told me once," she said, "that you said kindness is the highest form of strength. I never understood that until now." I smiled faintly. "Then, at least you learned something." She nodded, her face soft with a kind of peace I hadn't seen before, and walked out into the sunlight, fragile, but perhaps finally human. That evening, Ethan came by the shelter, as he often did. He had mud on his boots and a grin on his face. "Big day," he said, sitting beside me. "We signed a new contract today. The business is growing." "I'm proud of you," I said, smiling. "You've worked for it." He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Juliet came to see you, didn't she?" I nodded slowly. He sighed. "She called me too, last week. I think she's trying to change." "She will," I said softly. "People always do, once they meet themselves." We sat there in silence for a while, watching the sky shift from orange to indigo. The first stars began to appear, one by one. "Do you ever regret it, Mom?" he asked suddenly. "What?" "Exposing everything. The truth, the money, the family, all of it." I thought for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "No. Because sometimes, to heal, you have to let everything burn. Only then can you grow something new in the ashes." He smiled, a little sadly, and nodded. "You're stronger than anyone I know." I chuckled softly. "No, Ethan. I'm just done being weak." Later that night, When the shelter was quiet and everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the window again. The city lights twinkled below like scattered fireflies. I picked up the same journal I'd kept for years, the one filled with letters I never sent, thoughts I never sent, pain I never shared. I turned to the last page and wrote, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without hate. It is seeing the wound and choosing not to bleed again." Then I closed the journal and placed it on the table. I looked around the room, simple, warm, filled with plants, books, and flowers, my home, my peace. For a woman who once thought her life had ended with a slap, it had only just begun. Asterisk, if you're still listening. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story reached your heart, remember, no matter who tries to break you, your worth is not theirs to decide. Sometimes, silence is power. Sometimes, revenge is truth. And sometimes, the greatest victory is simply finding peace. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every story deserves to be heard.